Is the US weaponizing access to US tech? Is it time for Europe to create its own AI system in order to compete? Is that even possible? Big questions as the fallout from the Trump administration's decision to block access to Anthropic's most powerful AI models continues. It was a decision that shocked Europe. Leaders from the G7 are meeting with the world's biggest tech titans. This is French President Emmanuel Macron with Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei. Macron also met with OpenAI co-founder Sam Altman. The talks are meant to focus on technological growth, but overshadowing them is a deep-seated fear that countries outside of the US are now locked out of critical AI infrastructure. Marie Sina is DW Europe economic correspondent, and she joins me now from the G7 summit in Evian, France. Marie, great to see you. I guess I have to begin by asking how significant this meeting is, having not just the G7 leaders in the room, but also AI's top power brokers.
It's huge because it shows us where the power sits. This is the first time that this big of a group of AI executives are participating in a G7 summit. They're not just on the sidelines, but they're participants. And it used to be the fact that tech executives were fighting for face time with world leaders. But now at this G7, we see that this script is flipped and that it's world leaders fighting for a seat at the table with the world's biggest AI companies. And it also goes to show that artificial intelligence has become one of the primary security issues here around the world. It's on par with topics like trade, tariffs, energy, defense, critical raw materials. So this is a big sign.
And the Trump administration's decision to block Anthropic from exporting AI models on national security grounds has clearly shocked many countries, including Europe, or could I say particularly in Europe. How much of a wake-up call do you think this really has been?
Well, it's less of a wake-up call than a wake-up shout, really, because the United States wields an incredible amount of power when it comes to the most advanced AI systems. And that becomes obvious when we look at the group that's at the table at this lunch. 5 of the AI companies present at this lunch are from the United States, whereas other G7 countries only have 1 company from their country each. So the US has really a stronghold over artificial intelligence. And with this move, it's showed that it's ready to wield this power to the detriment of other countries' access. And this is particularly worrying for Europe because Europe depends on non-European technology for 80% of its technology. So European hospitals, European research labs, European governments are using non-European technology, primarily American or US technology. And this move has shown that it's actually very dangerous to be this dependent. Now, the European Commission or the European Union already knew this before, and coincidentally earlier this month, it published a plan to become more independent on technology. It published the Tech Sovereignty Package, in which it announced that Europe wants to triple its data center capacity over the next years. It wants to build AI gigafactories, and it wants to use more open source technology and move away from US technology. Now, that's the plan. But the reality on the ground here is that Europe is short on technology funding. Europe is short on computing power compared to the United States. And Europe is missing a European Google, a European Anthropic, and a European OpenAI. And so this move by the United States has really shown light on this big chasm that exists between Europe and the United States.
OK, with all that in mind, then, what do EU leaders really want from this meeting?
Well, surely on the top of their agenda will be to regain access to Anthropic, to regain access to the most developed AI models that currently exist. And insiders I've spoken to have said that there are talks on the sidelines between Europe and US officials about a potential plan to create a circle of allies around the United States, which will collaborate, or which is supposed to collaborate on testing these models together. And that kind of a plan would help Europe regain access to Anthropic and to the latest AI models. But there is a difficulty for Europe here because over the last years, Europe has really branded itself as sort of an enemy to big tech, really. It's pushed for more regulation than innovation. It's shown that it wants to be a stronghold in protecting its citizens from the potential dangers of artificial technology and of this innovation. It's shown that it wants to be rather safe than sorry, whereas the United States is on the other end of that spectrum. It's shown that it would rather be sorry than safe. And now it's really on Europe to show that it's open for artificial intelligence and to become a more attractive partner to collaborate with the United States on it. So it's really going to have to rebrand itself here somewhat.
And I guess it's not going to want to rock the boat because also at that lunch is Donald Trump himself, the whole Trump administration, obviously very much there at the G7. So how are they going to sort of tread that very fine line then between saying we want to cooperate, but at the same time we are pretty unhappy with what decision has been made by the Trump administration when it comes to, for example, Anthropic?
Well, I'd love to be a fly on the wall at this meeting and see how they navigate this. I think it's likely that they will not corner Donald Trump. Just the fact alone that the U.S. administration will be there with 5 companies versus European leaders, which only have one AI company each on their side. So they're outnumbered here. And generally, the consensus here at the G7 has been that this summit has really benefited from a positive mood on the side of Donald Trump. He came here, he arrived here with a deal with Iran in his pocket, according to him. And that's made for constructive momentum here on also other issues like Ukraine. And surely European leaders will have that in mind as they meet with U.S. President Donald Trump and with American AI companies, that really they're not in a position here to be pushy, but that they're going to have to strike a conciliatory tone.
Absolutely. Marie Sina, thank you so much for joining us from the G7 in France. Great to talk to you. Well, joining us now is Andrea Renda, who is Director of Research at the think tank CEPS. That's the Centre for European Policy Studies. He also advises institutions, including the European Commission, on tech innovation and industrial policy. So great to have you with us. Thank you very much. My first question then is, how concerned do you think Europe is that the US is weaponizing access to US tech?
I would say very concerned, and increasingly so. Europe has been concerned in particular since the beginning of the Trump administration, the second stint of Trump as the president of the United States, because it has seen an increased transactional approach of the U.S. vis-a-vis the European Union, and also the possibility for the U.S. to even refuse and deny access to the most advanced technologies to the European Union. The EU has also gradually recognized that it has a very high level of dependency on very powerful tech players in the United States. And this includes, of course, cloud operators such as Amazon or Microsoft or Google. And even if this dependency is quite consolidated, I mean, it reflects a long-term relationship with them and a consolidated presence of these players in Europe, legislation in the United States could force these players to hand over the data in case of national security problems. So this creates a lot of concern in the EU and a willingness to reduce those dependency in the coming years.
So it's fair to say then that Europe is too exposed to political decisions taken in Washington?
Yeah. In principle, when our transatlantic relation was very, a relation between like-minded countries and based on mutual trust, the dependency was simply a fact of life. Really, we were running largely on American tech. But the moment the United States become a more adversarial or hostile or a less reliable player, well, that dependency becomes a vulnerability. And any bloc, and particularly the EU, needs to try to remedy that situation if it wants to have stability and a concrete prospects of developing its own economy in the coming years.
So on that point, we do hear a lot about AI sovereignty. And earlier this month, the EU unveiled its plan for slashing dependence on American technology. Let's just listen now to the EU Tech Commissioner who was speaking earlier this month.
Europe wants to be in the position to make its own choices, avoiding risky dependencies on single dominant suppliers, one company or one third country. Because we live in a world where geopolitics and technology go hand in hand. Those who champion technological innovation will shape the future. And we must ensure that Europe plays a leading role in this.
So the EU's tech commissioner there saying the EU needs to play a leading role. In practical terms then, what does that actually mean for Europe?
That's a very good question. Nobody knows, right? It means, in principle, being in a position in which you can source critical raw materials, compute infrastructure, AI solutions, content, cloud services from a variety of players. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to build and make everything in Europe, although there's quite a few people in Europe that think that this should be the way, right? That Europe should become more autarkic in that respect. Now, in practice, it is impossible for the EU to be able to build everything it needs in the coming years, like to have European advanced chips, to have individual access to raw materials as needed to develop the future solutions that are necessary for the AI-driven economy. So the resulting recipe for Europe is a quite difficult one. On some areas, it will need to invest in its own solutions or scaling up its own players. In other areas, it will need to diversify sources of supply, dealing more with India, with Japan, with Korea, maybe even with China, right? And no matter what this means for the transatlantic relations. And in some other areas, it might have to sort of signal to its partners that it also has a number of players that are essential to the global AI economy. Think about ASML or some solutions in 5G, 6G that Nokia and Ericsson have, and use this essential, say, inputs into the AI economy as a sort of a bargaining chip to avoid that others instrumentalize and weaponize the dependency to their benefit, right? And that is very important. I mean, Europe has to become a grown-up from a shiny regulator that spoke mostly about the Brussels effect to a much more, let's say, skillful player in the global landscape of AI governance.
And I guess that's difficult, isn't it? Because you hit the nail on the head there that Europe so far has tried to play regulator, but now they, as you say, they need to step up and be more of an adult in the room. I just wanted to pick up on one thing. I mean, how do you unpick systems when countries' infrastructure is so embedded in US tech? I know that, for example, the European Parliament has now said that they're going to ditch Google in favour of the French search firm Quant. We've had France saying its domestic intelligence service is breaking from Palantir, of course, another huge US company. But in reality, it's going to be difficult to break free, isn't it?
It's going to be very difficult. We have an estimated, if you take all the different layers and what we call the technology stack, an estimated 80% dependency on other parts of the world. In some areas, like in cloud services, where this is particularly sensitive, we go even beyond. We are over 90% dependent on 4 players, but in particular 3 that are all US-based and a tiny bit from Chinese player Alibaba, right? Scaling the European solutions up is going to be complicated. It makes the EU potentially in the future more sovereign, but these solutions also have to become more secure. They also have to become as secure, at least, as the very rich US tech giants that invest a lot in security. So on the one hand, it's important to be sovereign. It's essential to become sovereign. But without investing in better European solution, that is not going to be a good answer to the problems Europe has. You can advance on sovereignty, you backtrack on security, and you lose out on competitiveness. So I don't think the overall game is really worth being played unless there is a major investment.
I mean, the European Commission has unveiled plans already, for example, AI gigafactories, large-scale computing infrastructure, and there are more proposed laws in the offing as well. Is that going to be enough, do you think?
Well, here I'm happy to elaborate because I've written a very extensive paper on this. I'm a bit concerned because the AI factories that the EU has already announced and is building are almost entirely relying on NVIDIA chips. And so compute that will be built in Europe, but it comes with American technology. And the American technology comes with layers of software on top. For example, the NVIDIA CUDA software, as it's called normally, that actually being proprietary, constrain the choices that Europe will have in terms of applications. Now, the gigafactories haven't been fully advertised or unveiled yet in terms of the terms of reference. But if those gigafactories will also run on NVIDIA chips, then what will happen is that the EU might eventually manage to reduce a little bit its dependency on non-EU-based cloud operators, such as Microsoft and Amazon, but it will replace that dependency with an enormous dependency on NVIDIA. And you know that NVIDIA chips have already been subject to export control by the Trump administration. So my question is, do we want to trade dependencies with dependencies, or do we want to reduce dependency and start diversifying our sources of supply so that we don't depend on one single point of failure or one single source of supply?
So finally, then, do you believe it is time for an EU-wide AI system, given what you've said, and is it even possible?
I think it is time to start building a sort of a public good, like an AI, a European large language model that is open source. And so researchers and entrepreneurs in Europe can use it to tailor it to their specific use cases. And it has to be a powerful one. So it has to be something that puts together all the scientific community in Europe and leverages the best compute and the best technologies that are out there. Now, that said, I don't think we need only that in Europe. And actually, perhaps we don't need the big, giant AI systems that the US is building. We'd rather need systems that are fit for the specific purposes. The AI compute that we need for autonomous vehicles is not the same that we need for a triage system in a hospital or for a fraud detection AI system in banking or even in government. So depending on what we want to do with AI, we might need larger or smaller models, larger or smaller data, and we need the compute that adapts to those specific use cases. The Chinese have understood this very well. The Americans have not understood it yet, and they are building gigantic, monstrous AI systems that are trying to achieve artificial general intelligence, but they are potentially less fit for the specific purposes that are those use cases that can improve our economy and bring economic and social benefits in the years to come. So my question is, if the US is on a sort of an Icarus flight, right, meaning building these monstrous AI systems with a promise that is not realized yet, can the EU chase Icarus with smaller wings, meaning with lower investment, or should the EU actually look for cases in which it can build exactly the right AI system it needs in order to achieve results in a sustainable way and in a sovereign way and becoming more competitive even than the US? I think we have to look east rather than west if we want to learn that lesson.
OK, thank you very much for that. Andrea, Renda from the CEPS, it was great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you think? Is the US weaponizing its AI tech? And how can Europe reduce its dependence on US tech companies and increase its own tech sovereignty? Do let us know in the comments. And, of course, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to our channel. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting. Thanks very much for being with us.